When I was a kid, I lived in a house with my cousins. I've had a variety of experiences there, and I know they were real because my family had similar experiences. My first encounter was while I was watching TV in my room. Suddenly, the dresser in the hallway began making loud banging noises. It was wooden and had large metal hoops to open the drawers. The sound was made by the hoops slamming against the wood. I could see them moving from where I was laying. Every time I would get up to look at it closer, the banging would stop. After a while of this, it just stopped on its own. I continued watching TV. It could not have been my sibling or a cousin messing around because everyone was gone. I was home alone. The second thing I can remember was constantly hearing voices. They would always sound like my mother, calling out my name or my sibling's name. Of course, it always happened when I was home alone. Once, I went downstairs thinking my parents had come home, but no one was there. The only thing out of place was a teacup sitting on the table in the living room. Thinking about this teacup makes me think about something else that happened often, almost every night. I would hear two teacups tinking together. I could tell it was teacups because it made a specific, higher-pitched sound than other cups. I would go downstairs after hearing it, but nothing looked different. This next experience occurred a few months after my grandfather's passing. Sometimes I would sleep in his room as we were very close, and it was comforting. One night, while I was drifting off, the cabinets in the room that would hold his medication began violently slamming and banging. I saw a figure in the hallway, hunched over and convulsing. This image is literally burned into my memory from how horrific it was. The next morning, I asked my parents about it. They said they heard the cabinets, but did not see anything in the hallway. As a kid living in a small town in Mexico, I grew up with solid values based on religion and believing in God and evil. At the age of 5, I got into many paranormal encounters that left me with a traumatic experience and phobias, such as a fear of sunset because the night was coming. Now you may think I'm joking, but I also encountered levitations and sleep paralysis. The worst encounter was when a force of energy took me when I was running to my mom's room and it pulled me back into my room. My mom didn't believe me until she saw me terrified in bed in my room, crying desperately. She brought in a priest to pray for me. The priest kind of practiced a type of exorcism. Growing up, the experiences decreased, and I did eventually overcome my traumas. At the age of 15, we immigrated to the United States. Nothing happened for 10 years. One night, I experienced another horrible encounter. I was awake in my bed looking at my phone. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with wide open eyes, and I started hearing voices, like babies crying. I thought for a second that I was going crazy. And then a voice in a very deep tone laughed and said,
"Do you think that you have escaped from me?"
My Aunt Maria and my Uncle Albert live in a small Midwestern city in the suburbs. They're now in their 70s, but they've lived in the same house since the late 1970s when they got married. The house has a basement that has always creeped me out. It's a normal ranch-style house, I think built in the 1950s, with a big basement because of tornadoes. When you enter, the staircase to the basement is to your left, protected by a simple metal gate. The kitchen is to the right of the entrance, and the living room borders the large staircase's metal railing. The staircase is carpeted and really steep. When my cousins were kids, they probably put in the metal gate for fear of them falling down the stairs, but they're steep, like oddly so. When I was a kid, I'd go over to their house to play video games with my cousins. They had a Nintendo in the basement. There's a den down there with an old TV and some boxes and an old armchair. The basement turns to the right from this area into a wide hallway. In this hallway, there's more junk and a bar that I don't think they've ever used. It has more boxes and random stuff around it. At the end of this hallway, there's a brick wall and some frosted windows that let the daylight faintly shine in. To the right of the bar, there's a smaller hallway where there's a washing machine and a dryer. My Aunt Maria does laundry there. I think this smaller hallway goes on to meet up with another brick wall, above which would be the driveway where you can just barely see through more frosted glass windows at ground level. So that's a physical description of the basement. I'll go over a handful of the strange things I associate with it. When I was a kid and I'd go down into that basement, I would never go farther than the den area. I just refused. It creeped me out. And I would make sure that when I turned the lights off, that I would run up the stairs to get out of there. That's pretty normal behavior for a kid, but having been there as an adult, I've noticed that everyone seems to have that kind of reaction down there. Except maybe my aunt. I don't think Albert goes down there much. Something that's important to note about my Aunt Maria is that she's an incredibly neurotic, nervous person. She keeps her house spotlessly clean, including plastic on the furniture. If something is out of place for her, she'll put it back immediately. That's just the kind of person she is. Except when it comes to the basement. My family moved out of that city when I was about 12, but we'd come back to visit my dad's family there about once a year. I remember once going back down there after having not been there for a whole year and discovering that the Nintendo cartridges and the TV remote were exactly where I had left them on the floor near the TV. It struck me as really strange that Maria hadn't put them somewhere else or neatly arranged them since I knew that I had moved them. It just seemed so out of character for her. One thing also I should note. My Uncle Albert's mother was killed during a robbery gone wrong in the 1990s. They never found her killer. Some of the boxes in the basement are likely her things. I lived in a house at the end of a cul-de-sac. The cul-de-sac broke off from a road widely known throughout the town to be haunted. In general, the place had a sort of spooky vibe. I couldn't quite put my finger on why. You could sort of just feel some weird energy. In my earliest memories there, I was around 5 years old. My family is heavy into video games, so at times I'd spend the night downstairs playing video games with my older and younger sisters. Most of the time we'd end up all passing out on the living room couches. Sometimes I'd wake up randomly throughout the night. Most nights, if not every night that I slept down there, I'd hear the knocking. Sort of like someone tapping their knuckle on wood furniture in intervals of 3. It would always come from the kitchen, and it never happened when anyone else but me was awake. It was so loud, I was always surprised it never woke anyone up. Sometimes, although it was rare, the tapping would be accompanied by a breathing sound. Not too heavy, but heavy enough for me to hear it from another room. Anytime it would start, I would start gradually feeling more and more terrified, like a sense of danger. I was too scared to go in the kitchen, too scared to move. But the knocking and the breathing would go on all night. I wouldn't be able to sleep until sunrise when it would eventually fade away. Those were just a few strange things that went on in that house. At night, my family and I experienced aggressive banging and shaking on the attic door entrance. It was so bad, we had to tape the attic door more securely during the night to stop the banging. There's also stuff like doors randomly slamming shut, things being in odd places, strange shadow figures in my peripheral vision. I remember having a nightmare about being on the staircase in the house when suddenly I would start to levitate. This dream reoccurred a few times, but ultimately stopped happening in more recent years. I genuinely believe that maybe whatever it was that kept me up at night never really left, as if it's been lurking in the background my whole life. What is it? What does it want? Why me? Years ago, me and my then girlfriend moved into a small, one-bedroom bungalow. We were both believers in the paranormal, but we didn't think we were moving into a haunted house. We started to notice things about a month after we moved in. We had just gone to bed one night, and we were trying to get to sleep when we heard someone moving around in the living room. The flooring there was really hollow, and you could hear someone in there from anywhere in the bungalow. Then, it sounded like someone sat on the sofa. I asked my girlfriend if she heard it, and she said yes. I asked her what she heard, and she said someone walking around the living room, and they sat on the sofa. We actually thought we were being burglarized. I found whatever weapon I could, a shoe, and I bolted out of the bedroom, across the hall, and into the living room, hoping to surprise the intruder. There was nobody there. This was just the beginning. I'd find the toothpaste in the kitchen where neither of us had put it. My girlfriend would take a bath and afterwards ask me what I wanted because she heard me calling her from the other side of the bathroom door, although I had never left the living room. And I didn't hear a thing. I'd be watching TV in the living room and hear someone whisper in my ear. Could never make out what it was saying. The activity seemed to be on a cycle. We'd have about 4 weeks of peace and quiet, and then 4 weeks of activity. We even saw things too. One time my girlfriend was in the bath and I was in the living room. I really needed to go to the bathroom, so I stood up and then I saw a completely black figure walking straight through the living room door right in front of me. It walked into the middle of the living room, leaned forward as if to check me out, and then stepped back. When it stepped back, it dissolved. I just stood there, trying to figure out what I just saw. I thought it had to be a shadow cast by car headlights or something in front of the large lamp that was on. I checked the street and there were no cars there. I went to the lamp, tried to replicate what I saw, and I couldn't. Another time I saw it, I had to get up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I didn't want to wake my girlfriend up, so I kept the lights off. The street lamp out there shone so I could see a little bit. After going to the bathroom, I noticed the hallway was darker than it should have been. This big black thing was blocking the light. I reached over for the light switch, and the large shadow took a step back. I turned the light on, and there was no shadow there. Nothing. When I was younger, I had a next-door neighbor named Lexi. She was my best friend. Our parents would go on trips on motorcycles with each other, and we would camp out at one of our houses until they came back. It was normal for us. This one night we were sitting in our bedroom, talking and doing what we normally did. We saw a bright light through her window, followed with the sound of motorcycles pulling onto the gravel driveway. We instantly thought, okay, our parents forgot something. But before we could even get up to leave the bedroom, we heard a knock and a soft woman's voice say, "Hello?" and the front door opening. This was a familiar sound because the door scraped against the hardwood flooring. We panicked, thinking there was an intruder because this woman did not sound like her mom or mine. We scouted the house, scared out of our minds, only to find the front door wide open and nobody and no motorcycle in the driveway. We felt just a little better. We walked back into her bedroom, but before she went to enter, she collapsed onto the floor and started sobbing. I didn't know what was happening. I was scared. I asked her what's wrong. She told me something as tall as the door frame was standing in her parents' room. After our parents returned, her family continued to have paranormal activity in their house. Eventually, they moved out. When I was a young child, I had 3 imaginary friends. They were shadows on the wall, distinct heads and shoulders for each, but they blended into one. I remember many times I'd be laying in my mom's bed and jabbering away at them. I'd see them out of the corner of my eye quite a few times over the years. I stopped seeing the imaginary friends around first grade. However, I've started to see something similar lately. My boyfriend and I were staying at his parents' house. It was nighttime and they were gone. My boyfriend was upstairs. I was on the patio smoking a cigarette. They had a hot tub and the steps for it were right in front of the glass doors leading into the kitchen. I was sitting on those stairs and the kitchen light was on. It was a very bright light. I saw an incredibly tall figure walk from my left to the right into the kitchen. It was definitely what you would think a shadow person would look like. It was very black. Yet, when it went more into the kitchen where it should have thrown a shadow, there was none. Where it walked from was just a wall. There were no vehicles in the neighborhood passing by at that time either. Nothing at all to play any tricks of light. Were my old friends back? I saw a shadow person at my old house in Hollywood. The building was about 100 years old and had 55 units in it. If any building had had a lot of turbulent residual energy, it would be this one. I'm sure a lot of crazy stuff has gone down there over the years. Weird stuff would happen there all the time. I would hear whispering in the living room, especially when I was in the kitchen and my back was to that room. I lived in a corner unit on the 3rd floor. The building had thick brick walls. Once, a drawer flew out of my dresser and landed several feet away. I had my foot grabbed in the middle of the night. Cabinets would open by themselves sometimes. I also watched a towel slide along a perfectly flat rack by itself. Once I was sitting in the living room watching TV. I like to watch with lights on. It's better for my eyes. The light was not casting a bunch of crazy shadows everywhere. From where I sat, I could see the hallway. I saw a full shadow figure walk down the hall into the spare bedroom. It unnerved me enough to get up and check the room. There wasn't anybody in there. It creeped me out. I stayed up for a long time that night. A few months later, I came home, and there was light shining in the cracks around that door. I knocked on the door, opened it. Every single light in the room was on. I turned off all the lights and shut the door. It made me really uncomfortable, like someone was invading my space and trying to mess with me. The place was really weird. I'm glad I don't live there anymore. My husband and I have seen shadow people. There was never a negative energy associated with them. On one occasion, I saw a black mass that looked hunched over and moved from a doorway towards the interior of a room. On another occasion, I ran into my bedroom, and though the light was off, I could see a completely pitch black head and torso in front of my closet. I almost ran into it. It appeared to step back before disappearing. A week or so after that experience, my husband was getting ready for work pretty early in the morning. He didn't want to turn on the bedroom light to wake me up. However, I was still awake because he was moving around. He sat at the end of our bed putting on his socks. He got up quickly and started to walk towards the door. When he took one step, I heard a plastic bag in the corner of the room crumple. My husband practically sprinted out of the room. When he got home from work, I asked him what happened, how I could hear a bag moving in the morning when he wasn't anywhere near it. He said he saw shadow legs from just the torso down, and when he got startled and jumped up, the legs quickly walked backwards and moved into the bag in the corner before disappearing. I asked my reverend what he thought of shadow people, and he mentioned that it could just be a spirit visiting. While many people see white lights, or white ghosts, it takes a lot of energy for a spirit to manifest into appearing, drawing energy from its surroundings to form a shape. On the other hand, he said it would be easier for a spirit to pull in energy rather than harnessing energy to make a figure, and that's why it could look like a shadow person or a hole ripped into their surroundings. At any rate, these shadow things didn't scare me or my husband. They seemed harmless. In college, I worked at one of the libraries on campus. I worked night shift as a closer, which entailed making sure the library was shut down, no one was hiding in it, and everything was properly put away. It wasn't too much of a big deal, and I enjoyed it. After work, I would usually go to the on-campus food place for some chicken fingers or a burger. It was just down the street, no more than a 5-minute walk. I began to notice that there were often people ahead of me walking very strangely. It almost appeared that the people were dancing, but in extremely exaggerated ways and very slowly. They would wave their arms above their heads in a wide arc while bending at the knees and occasionally jumping in the air. It seemed like they were on drugs or drunk, which were both highly probable on this campus, so I mostly ignored them. One night, as I was walking behind these people, I realized I'd never seen them close up. I hadn't really thought much about it, but they never got close enough for me to pick out details or walk into the light at all. In fact, all they looked like were dancing silhouettes. Being curious, I watched them more closely and noticed they never became clear to see, even when passing under streetlights. Stranger still, I caught a glance at them going around a bend one time when they had to pass in front of a large windowed building. I couldn't see them in the window. They didn't have any reflection. They were gone when I rounded the corner. Now, if this happened once, then I would be skeptical. Maybe I was tired, or it was people in morph suits trying to freak out freshmen. But this happened repeatedly once or twice a week for 4 years. I eventually told other people about them, and they started seeing them as well. A couple years ago, my grandmother passed away. She lived in a rural town where the electricity often went out, and water came from wells. I was deeply attached to my grandmother. Her last wish was to see me before she took her final breath. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it in time. This fact weighed heavily on my heart. 2 years later, I found myself back in my hometown. One night, as darkness enveloped the village, The electricity flickered out as usual. My cousins and aunts sat outside, chatting under the moonlight. One of my aunts asked my cousin and me to fetch a lamp from the storeroom adjacent to the kitchen. The rustic charm of our rural home was evident in its old brick walls, some of which were crumbling. With the torch in hand, my cousin and I ventured into the storeroom. As I rummaged around for the lamp, I noticed a shadow on the wall moving behind me. It mimicked the distinct bent posture of my grandmother, who had suffered from a back injury. I assumed it was my cousin playing a prank, so I chuckled and asked her to stop. But the shadow persisted, trailing my every move. Growing frustrated, I called out to my cousin for help with the lamp. However, when I turned around, the room was empty. Confused and a bit unnerved, I stormed outside, convinced my cousin was behind the trick. To my surprise, she was sitting with the others in the yard, far from the storeroom. My cousin said she hadn't been in the storeroom with me at all. Instead, she was fetching matches from the kitchen. The realization hit me like a wave. If the shadow was not my cousin, who or what had I encountered in that storeroom? The following morning, I fell ill with a high fever, prompting a trip to the hospital. To this day, I ponder whether I had truly encountered my grandmother's spirit, or if it was a figment of my imagination, or something else. After 10 years of sharing an apartment with a roommate, I decided to move out and into a second-floor apartment. This new place was once part of a larger home, but had been converted into 2 separate units. The first floor was still a house, while the second floor was turned into an apartment for the owner's daughter. When she moved out after getting married, they decided to rent it out. The layout was simple. A single entrance door led to a flight of stairs. At the top of the stairs, the bathroom door was directly across, the bedroom entrance was to the right, and to the left was a small kitchen leading to a spacious living room. The living room held my interest, especially with its unique half-door storage spaces built into 2 walls. The first week in the new place was peaceful. However, after about a week, I experienced something strange. One night, as I prepared to head to work for my overnight shift at the factory, I found all 6 storage doors wide open in the living room. Perplexed, I closed them, chalking it up to a forgetful moment before bed. That night, while watching a movie after dinner, I decided to take a shower. As I undressed and started the water, I heard a knock at the main door. Quickly pulling on my pants, I headed downstairs, only to find nobody there. Assuming they had left, I returned upstairs to shower, making sure to close the bathroom door behind me as usual. Mid-shower, there came a loud pounding at the bathroom door. Startled, I called out, but received no response. Frozen with fear, I listened, hearing nothing more after a few minutes. I cautiously resumed my shower, only to have the pounding return, stronger than before. So I hurried up and dried off and flung open the door, ready to confront whoever was causing the disturbance. But there was nobody there. I felt watched. I rushed back upstairs, commanding whatever presence was there to leave. However, the strange occurrences persisted. For the 3 years I lived there, the bathroom door would be pounded on whenever closed, and the storage doors, they would randomly open. The most terrifying incident happened one night as I headed to bed. just as I approached my bedroom door, it slammed shut in front of me. Unable to shake off the fear, I ended up sleeping on the couch that night. Despite my attempts to cleanse the place and ward off whatever was haunting it, nothing seemed to work. In the early 90s, every Wednesday we would take my grandmother out to eat. She had two favorite places. One of them was a Chinese restaurant that was attached to like a Sam's Club type superstore. The Chinese spot was attached to the front of the store and overlooked the entire parking lot. One Wednesday night we were at the Chinese restaurant, sitting in a booth by the window. I was sitting closest to the window, across from my dad. My parents were talking to my grandmother about who knows what. I was picking at my food, staring out at the empty parking lot. That was when I noticed a man walking up the front sidewalk of the restaurant. He wore what seemed to be a light blue business suit, a fedora hat, and he was holding a briefcase. I was staring at him, but not intently, because I was thinking about something else. It wasn't until he was about 20 feet from us that I noticed something odd. He stopped to look at his wristwatch, and I realized I could see the cars in the parking lot through his body. My first instinct at 10 years old was to find a logical explanation. He must have been inside the restaurant, and I'm seeing his reflection, thus allowing me to see the cars through his body. So I looked to my left, he's not there. I looked to my right, and there he was. I realized I was probably looking at an apparition. I was so excited I was trying to get my dad's attention to point it out. I was barely eking out the word dad. As that happened, I pointed to the apparition, and he looked up at me, began to continue walking towards, but past us, and eventually, he faded into nothing. I was so stunned and excited I pinched myself because I thought maybe I was dreaming. Fast forward several years. I'm 21 years old at this time, hanging out with my cousins. I don't remember how we got on the subject of ghosts, but I told this story. One of my friends turned white, and he said to me, "Tell me you're just messing with me." I was confused. I was like, "What? What do you mean?" He then told me that when he was a kid, his parents were leaving that same parking lot one night. He was sitting in the back of the car, and his dad reversed out of a parking spot. Just then, his mom, from the passenger seat, began to freak out. She's yelling at his dad to slam on the brakes because there's a man walking behind the car. His dad looks at her like she's crazy and says, "I was looking behind my shoulder the whole time. There's nobody there." My friend's mom described the man as wearing a three-piece suit, a fedora hat, and he was holding a briefcase. For the past decade, I've indulged in a peculiar hobby of mine, staying at haunted bed and breakfasts. Most of the time, the tales of supernatural encounters and eerie happenings turn out to be greatly exaggerated or entirely fabricated. However, every once in a while, I stumble upon some truly extraordinary experiences. One such occasion took place in Key West, Florida, at a charming bed and breakfast called Morero's. It was approximately 3 a.m. The entire house was enveloped in darkness. All the lights had been switched off in the quaint 13-bedroom establishment. As I settled into bed, I began to hear things. Naturally, in an old building, one expects the occasional creak or groan. But on this particular night, I distinctly heard footsteps, hushed conversations, and breathing. Some of the sounds may have been carried in from the bustling street outside. However, the breathing, that was different. In the stillness of the room, I could discern an irregular wheezing, akin to the labored gasps of an elderly individual whose lungs have been ravaged by disease. Still, I brushed it off as the settling of the aging wooden structure due to the cooling temperatures of the night. By now, it was around 4 a.m., but I was wide awake. Suddenly, an immense weight pressed down upon my chest. It felt as if someone was sitting directly on my ribcage. I couldn't sit up, I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. Out of nowhere, a whispering voice caressed my ear. It was unmistakably feminine, softly uttering a word in a tone that suggested lips pressed against the side of my face. Then, the pressure on my chest vanished. I jolted upright in bed. I switched on the lights, checking if my companion was awake and had witnessed the strange occurrence. The next morning, I recounted the events to my girlfriend, who, due to her deep slumber, had missed the entire episode. In an attempt to detect any signs of paranormal activity, I placed my keys in a circle on a plain sheet of white paper before retiring for the next night. I was disappointed the next morning. They remained undisturbed. And that word, the word that was whispered into my ear, I couldn't identify it as anything in English. I'm puzzled to this day. Since that incident, I have returned to Marrero several times in the hopes of gathering further evidence of supernatural activity. Unfortunately, luck has yet to be on my side. Nevertheless, I remain determined to continue my quest, eager for any future encounters that may shed light on the mysterious occurrences within those old walls. When I was 13 years old, I had a ghostly encounter in my previous home. My bedroom was located on the lower level of our raised ranch house, while the rest of my family's bedrooms were upstairs. From the very first night I slept in that room, I was overcome with an unsettling feeling, like someone or something was always watching me. Strange occurrences would happen every now and then, like hearing footsteps, random knocks, or seeing objects mysteriously moving on their own. After 2 months in the house, something eerie took place. I went to bed as usual, turning off the lights and closing my bedroom door. At 2 a.m., I suddenly woke up. Every hair on my body stood on end. To my astonishment, the light outside my door was on. My bedroom door was wide open. I shifted my gaze and began to hear footsteps emanating from the hallway in front of my room. Fear overwhelmed me as I stared at my open doorway, the light casting an eerie glow, while the sound of footsteps echoed in the stillness. Then, I heard 2 distinct jiggles on the locked door further down the hall. I was certain of the sound since I used that door every day. It led to the garage, which I knew was closed, meaning the jiggling came from the inside. I felt completely paralyzed. After a brief pause, the footsteps resumed. Around 5 or 6 of them traversed back from the door to the area in front of my room. There was an undeniable presence that I could sense. Like any 13-year-old would do, I slowly turned towards the wall, closed my eyes tightly, and forced myself to fall back asleep. Eventually, I moved out of the house, but I can honestly say that I've never encountered anything as chilling and horrifying since that night. It was 5 years later that I discovered the grandfather of the family who lived in our old house before us had passed away in the very same downstairs bedroom that I had occupied. My friend James rented a house immediately after the previous tenant passed away. The circumstances were unusual because James's wife, who works as a paramedic, responded to the previous tenant's 911 call when he suffered the heart attack. Unfortunately, despite their efforts, the man's condition worsened and he passed away before reaching the hospital. Given the circumstances, James and his wife were able to quickly secure the rental from the landlord. From the moment James moved in, he claimed that the house was haunted. I was skeptical when he told me about them because I had only recently met him through his brother, whom I had known for a while. However, since my fiancé was friends with James's wife, we were invited over for dinner one evening. James once again recounted his encounters, assuring me that I would witness strange phenomena. I felt like being in the audience of a magic show, where my task was to figure out the tricks behind the illusions. I anticipated James repeatedly pulling tricks, and I was prepared to expose them throughout the evening. To my surprise, the lights in the house flickered rapidly, even when no one was near the switches. I brushed it off as a faulty breaker, but James simply shrugged it off. His wife showed me a hidden cabinet near the entrance, explaining that she dreamed about its existence and later discovered it with James after she woke up in the middle of the night. I believed her account, considering her more serious demeanor, although it could have been her unconscious thought or knowledge gained during her response to the 911 call at the house. Suddenly, we heard loud footsteps coming from upstairs. I quickly rushed up to investigate, but I found no evidence of a setup or practical joke. Then, 2 doors closed on their own, leaving James baffled. He just shrugged and looked at me as if to say, "See?" Later, when I went into the kitchen alone to get a glass of water, someone had mysteriously moved my car keys from one table to another while everyone else was in the dining room. The most astonishing moment was yet to come. As we continued discussing these occurrences, I made a lighthearted remark to James, telling him that it would take much more than these experiences to convince me. I jokingly suggested that the ghost could even call us on the phone. The phone rang. James laughed and answered it, waiting to see the caller ID. I can't tell you how bewildered I felt when I saw my own phone number from my house appear on James's caller ID while I was present in his living room with my fiancé. To clarify, no one was at my house at that time. When I was 8 years old, my family moved into an old house which was built in 1810. My father still lives there. For 9 years, until I was 17, I felt a pressure on my bed as if someone had sat down next to me every night before I fell asleep. I always felt an increase in pressure in the air at the same time. Although I knew this wasn't a common occurrence, I didn't think much about it. However, things changed when I received a cat for my 12th birthday. Each night, the cat would sleep on my bed and suddenly bolt from a dead sleep and glare at something in the doorway before running out of the room. A few moments later, the pressure on the bed would return. While this was a strange experience, I didn't question it much, thinking that maybe my cat was just nervous. I didn't talk about this to anyone, but I started referring to the feeling, or presence, as Charlotte, although I'm not sure why. One summer day when I was 13, an elderly man and his middle-aged daughter visited our house and asked if they could take a tour of the place. They explained that the man lived in the house with his aunt as a boy and later raised his family there. During the tour, my mother asked if they remembered any strange occurrences or stories about the house. The man chuckled and said that everyone who slept in one particular bedroom felt a little unsettled, and his daughter said that she always felt as if someone sat on the edge of her bed at night. Her father used to joke that it was his aunt looking out for them, his Aunt Charlotte. This confirmed what I had never admitted to myself, that I had been experiencing a ghostly presence every night for the past 5 years. Going to bed was never scary or freaky, and I just tried to ignore the feeling when it came. However, one night when I was 16, my parents were going through a difficult patch in their marriage, and I was feeling depressed. After about 20 minutes of going to bed, the cat bolted out of the room, and I felt the familiar pressure on my side. Then, I felt a hand brush through my hair. I ran straight downstairs to my mother, who was dozing in the living room. She asked me what was wrong, and I told her I had a nightmare. I spent a week sleeping in the guest room, and when I went back to my room, I realized that I didn't feel the pressure next to me, but I still felt pressure in the air. I rolled on my back and saw the figure of a woman in her 60s wearing a house dress. Her hair was pulled back in a bun, her arms folded. She was looking right at me, appearing very concerned. When I found my voice, she disappeared. I said out loud, "I don't care if you stay, but I can never see you again." And I never did. A few years later, after my parents divorced, and my dad moved in his girlfriend and her 4-year-old son, I wasn't really surprised when she told me her little boy said a lady named Charlotte told him stories at night. Last year, I stayed in a hotel with my mom. One night, while lying in bed, I noticed a human-shaped shadow about 2 meters away from me. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a shadow, but it persisted. When I turned the light on, it disappeared, but reappeared when I turned off the light again. I searched the room but found nothing that could have caused the shadow. It looked exactly like a human silhouette, and it hadn't been there the previous nights. Even though I never believed in ghosts before, I was terrified. I eventually fell asleep with my back turned to the shadow. The next morning, I told my mom about the experience, but she shrugged it off as my imagination. However, a few days later, when we were back home, my mom brought up the shadow, revealing that she had seen it too. She didn't want to scare me at the time, but she believed that it might have been the ghost of her recently deceased best friend, who she had just written a letter for to get closure before we went to bed that night. I was working a night shift from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. at a bone marrow transplant unit with only one other nurse. We had 5 patients, and it was 3:30 a.m. when my coworker came out of room 4. She was startled as the bathroom door closed on her while she was emptying a urinal, causing her to spill urine on herself. She told me that a young man who had been in that room had died a gruesome death. Apparently, he was supposed to be discharged, but one night around 4 a.m., the nurses heard a thump. When they rushed in the room, the man was in the bathroom with his central line out and blood everywhere. Despite their efforts to save him, he died right there. Nobody knows why he pulled his line or what had happened, but the scene was horrific. A few weeks later, an elderly patient was in that same room and asked the nurse if someone had died in there. When the nurse confirmed that it was a hospital and it was possible, the patient replied that she believed a young man had died there because he was talking to her. Later, the nurse found that one of the patient's triple lumen central lines was cut, not pulled out. There were no scissors in the room. The patient claimed that the young man had done it. I often struggle with sleeping, so a few nights every week I stay up very late. One particular night, it was around 2 a.m. when something strange happened. As a habit, I always lock my bedroom door before I sleep, especially since I moved away from home. However, on that night, my brother was staying with me but ended up staying somewhere else without letting me know. Suddenly, I heard my bedroom door creaking open. I called out to my brother, but he did not answer. When I checked, there was no one there. I called out again, but still no response. Although I don't scare easily, I felt eyes on me. I got up and started checking each room in my house one by one. It was one of the most terrifying situations I've experienced for no apparent reason. Maybe it was just an issue with the doorframe. I ended up staying awake all night, and ever since then I've never felt alone in the house. I've been hearing strange noises more and more often, especially a scratching sound coming from my closet. After investigating, I realized that it was just a small steel wire rubbing against the door. However, when I stopped it and closed the door, the scratching sound started up again a few seconds later and stopped just before I opened the door again. I've researched for answers, and some people believe that an opening door symbolizes the start of a new path in life. However, my grandfather also passed away in the house, so I can't help but think that he may still be around. At the end of the day, it could just be that I forgot to fully close the door, and the changing pressure in the house made it open. However, I always make sure to give it a good push and hear the lock click just in case. I don't believe in ghosts, but looking back, I've had a lot of paranormal experiences. The first experience. When I was young, around 4 or 5, I was in my grandma's house and she had a computer set up under her stairs. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, I saw a man turn around in the chair. He said his name was Peter, and I started crying because I was a young girl and there was a strange man in my mama's house. He then told me to sit on his knee and he hugged me. About a month later, my grandma was showing me photos of my granddad, who died when my mom was 14. I immediately recognized him as the guy I met under the stairs. The next experience was definitely when I was 6, because it was the year my mom met my stepdad. I was in my mom's bed with my mom downstairs with my sisters, and I heard a really soft voice say, "Lay down." I opened my eyes and tensed up, and I stayed still because demons can't get through a blanket, right? A few seconds later it said, "That's it." I ran downstairs and cried to my mom. The next experience happened a few months after this and continued for maybe 3 months. I kept having dreams about a woman who lived in my wardrobe. I dreamed about her a lot, and she was always paying attention to my sister, who was on the bunk bed under me. My mom said it wasn't real, but the wardrobe would always be open in the morning. It had latches, so it shouldn't have opened on its own. It is possible, because it was pretty cheap, but it just doesn't feel right. When I turned 7, my mom and my stepdad went on a holiday together for the weekend. I was being babysat by my oldest sister and her husband. My niece had just been born. It was about midnight when I was woken by my sister and her friends downstairs. Like any child, I immediately went on my iPad and started playing a video game. I started hearing my mom's voice from the corner of the room. She talked for about 30 minutes before I started getting closer. I ran downstairs to my sister and her friends. The next experience, my second oldest sister was living away for mental health reasons. My mom and stepdad moved into a new house, and for about 2 years I would talk to her when she wasn't there. 3 months after I started doing this as a coping mechanism, I started hearing her talk back from under my bed. It stopped when I threw out one of my dolls. Another experience. I was a lot older, maybe 12. I was looking after my niece while my sister was asleep upstairs with her new son. I was watching TV with her and she started talking to the chimney. Of course, I thought she made an imaginary friend. It's really cute. I asked who she was talking to. She said a name along the lines of Rupert or something, but I didn't hear right. I asked her again. She looked worriedly at the chimney, then at me, and said nobody's there. Of course, I didn't believe this, so I asked her if she was sure. She told me, "He'll talk to you later." That just terrified me. I'm gonna backtrack a little bit. Speaking of imaginary friends, I used to have one. He was in a wheelchair. One time he got scared when I went out to the ice cream truck, and he screamed at me to stop. Later in my life, I learned of my cousin who died when he was run over by an ice cream truck. Another experience happened at my grandma's. I went there a lot because I felt safest there at the time, and that's where I could see my dad. Me and my sister would share the room, but at this point, my sister was away for the mental health stuff, and I was really scared. I woke up around 1 a.m., and I saw the wardrobe door with all the sewing and clothes stuff swinging very slowly back and forth. I just laid there and cried. I never slept with the window open, so it couldn't have been the wind. I kind of wish it was. My last direct experience. I had just moved from England to Australia with my stepdad's job. I had a hard time sleeping, as this wasn't soon after my grandma died, so I was going through a lot at the time. I spent a lot of time watching TV at night. I'd play with the curtains using my feet because I needed constant stimulation. After about half an hour, I heard the most clear from behind me. I shot up and sat there for another 20 minutes because I didn't want it to think I was going to run away. In my mind, running away meant it would chase me. This shit just haunts me. This incident happened at our old house. I believe that there are two contributing factors to our house back then being haunted. It was the only house on the left side of a hill that had a Catholic school for boys nearby, and a lone grave of the owner of the land on the lower part of the hill. The school has its own history of being haunted. It was built by the British in the olden days. It has also been said that the toilet area is haunted by a headless man who was probably murdered there. The sounds of a basketball bouncing in the middle of the night can also be heard. There's also been stories of the priest abusing the boys living in the hostel, making them scrub the dirty toilets and denying them food. My experience happened there when I was pretty young. The ground floor was still being constructed. At the time, my cousins were also staying with us, so the bedrooms were all occupied. Problem with that was the late delivery of the door, which meant that me, my mother, and brother would have to sleep in the room that had no door. It was partially covered by a tin while the upper part was left exposed. The thought of having to sleep that way made us feel very uncomfortable, especially my mother. But since we had no choice, we did it anyway. We turned off the lights as soon as possible so as to avoid any possible intruders from noticing that they could get in the house. Throughout the night, nothing happened. But early in the morning, around 4:30 a.m., I woke up. I was just looking at the sky that was returning to its normal shade of blue when I suddenly saw a huge man of about 6 feet looking at me from the exposed part of the doorway. He had an unkempt beard. His skin looked muddy, and he had long knotted hair. He also had a machete in his hand. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I just lay there until he broke his gaze away and started walking, till I heard him jump over the wall. As soon as I was able to move again, I tried to wake up my mom and tell her about it, which I did, but she obviously did not believe me. I still have questions. Why was he there? Was it a human or something else? When my grandma left my abusive grandpa, she moved herself and 2 of her 3 daughters into a new house. My aunt met a guy and they started dating. He was what you would call a greaser. Hot rod driving, leather jacket wearing, greased back hair having dude. This would have been the early 1970s. Most nights, he'd park down the street and walk to her bedroom window, tap on it, and she'd let him in. Her bedroom was at the back of the house and the driveway was gravel. I went past my mom's bedroom. My mom told me every time he did it, she'd hear his boots crunching in the gravel as he walked by. They would do whatever they did, and he'd climb back out the window and leave. Somehow, my aunt eventually met who would become my uncle, and she broke things off with the guy. He didn't take it well. One night, he stopped by and tapped on the window. My aunt let him in, and they talked for over an hour. Then he left. The phone rang in the living room, and she went out to answer it. Her friend was on the other end, sobbing. She told my aunt that the guy had killed himself. He drove around in his hot rod with a buddy, drinking liquor, shooting mailboxes. Then they pulled into a convenience store parking lot, and he shot himself in the face, killing himself. My aunt said that was impossible. He just left her house. She then looked up and saw the guy standing outside staring at her through the living room window with blood all over his face. My aunt screamed, waking everyone in the house. The guy disappeared. My aunt told them that night what had gone on, and that was the only time she ever spoke about it. I've asked her a couple times to tell me, she wouldn't. Grandma and Mom eventually told me about it years later. From then on, my mom would hear his boots crunching in the gravel every night. My aunt would hear him tap on the window. It got so bad for my aunt that she begged my mom to switch rooms. They did, and my mom heard the tapping on the window. My grandma told me they'd always find his brand of cigarette butts in the ashtrays. Back in 2008, I happened to deliver pizza to that house. I asked the woman if anything strange went on there, and she froze. She said the back room window got tapped on all the time, as well as knocking on the side door. Even though the driveway was paved, she heard what sounded like boots on it all the time. One of my first memories from my childhood is a weird one, but I recall the events of one night in particular as if it were yesterday. I was fairly young, about 3 or 4 years old. I had an older brother who was 4 years older than me, and we lived with our parents. One night, I woke up with a horrible stomach ache. I climbed out of my crib. I remember vomiting a handful of times before I made it to the hallway. Once I reached the hallway, I could hear a voice that sounded like it was coming from my brother's room. It kept calling out, "Mama," over and over. I stepped into my brother's room and he was sound asleep. I stepped back into the hallway and felt that the origin of the voice was right where I was standing in the hallway. My attention was brought back to my stomach ache, so I turned back towards my parents' bedroom for my first ever rendition of a childhood classic. "Mom, Dad, I threw up." My mom takes the lead this time and takes me to the bathroom, which is directly across from my brother's room. I asked my mom, "Do you hear that voice?" "What voice?" "You're just tired. Let's get back to bed." And that was that. I heard it continuing throughout the night until I eventually dozed off back to sleep. The next morning I woke up to a plumber trying to fix a leak in the ceiling of our hallway between my brother's room and the bathroom, right where I heard the voice. I remember it being an issue because the plumber couldn't seem to find the source of the leak and left with a sort of not sure what to do vibe about his exit. "Mama, Mama." I remember that voice. I always will. I'm 33 now, and I'm married with 2 kids of my own. My oldest is in the middle of sleep training and just woke up from a nightmare. He's been calling out for his mama. I remember that voice. My wife used to work at the Great Wolf Lodge in Mason, Ohio. She worked 3rd shift at the front desk for 5 years, and things would happen there constantly. Many times I'd take her to work and hang out in the lobby until she got off, instead of making the long drive back home and then back to get her in the morning. Employees she worked with would share stories with me all the time about things that happened to them or to guests. One room in particular that seems to be the most haunted had reports from guests that something in the middle of the night would jump on their beds. One day, the bathtub overflowed and the water leaked down into the basement. When they checked the room, nobody had been in there and the room had not been rented. It seemed as if a lot of the things that happened there either happened in the lobby or on the 1st floor. Every night, they had to print a report and get it from the main office on the 1st floor. My wife went down the stairs, and while she walked, the elevator started following her from the lobby to the 1st floor. When she got down there, the doors to it opened, and nobody was on it, nor was there anybody waiting for it. Another night, she got the report and was waiting at the doors for the elevator. Behind her, she heard a man say, "You never asked my name." She spun around. Nobody was there. She walked down the halls and found nobody with her anywhere. One night, she got a call from the office, but no one was supposed to be in there, and it was locked at night. The night shift supervisor went down to check it out with security and found the door to be locked and nobody inside. That happened quite a bit. One time he came back upstairs from checking, and as soon as he reached the top of the stairs, a phone that sat at the host station at one of the restaurants there rang, so he picked it up. The extension it called from was the office. He heard nothing but dead air. Another night, my wife got a call from an extension she didn't recognize. When she answered it, she heard nothing but dead air. Not even her supervisor knew the extension. After hanging up, she decided to call the extension back, and the phone in front of her supervisor, who sat right next to her at the desk, rang. He picked it up, and they confirmed that it was her that called. Except it wasn't his extension at all. Upon further investigation, they found that extension did not exist anywhere in the hotel. One night I had to use the bathroom, so I walked down the hall off the lobby. As I got to it, I looked up and saw someone walking in ahead of me. All I saw was their leg from about the knee down. It appeared to be a white guy, red shorts, white socks, red shoes. I was only a few feet away, yet nobody had been in front of me at all in the hall. When I went into the bathroom, I didn't see him. I looked in each stall. I was alone. There was absolutely nowhere for him to go. Another night, sometime around Halloween, they had the lobby all decorated and there was a DJ booth. Right around 4:45 in the morning, it began playing a song really loud and scared the hell out of us all. The supervisor went to shut it off, and after he did, he informed us that it had been off when he came in. It'd been off the whole time I was there, too. This place is right next to Kings Island, which is also supposed to be haunted. Ghost hunters did a show from there once and found nothing. I'm not sure why they never bothered going to the lodge next door to hunt. They'd probably turn up all kinds of things, because stuff happens regularly there. Maybe the company doesn't want that kind of publicity. I guess I ruined that. Should you ever happen to go to do some hunting, things seem to happen mostly between 3 and 5 in the morning. Good luck. We moved to California in 2019 because of military orders. We were living on base housing when this all took place. My husband was due to be gone for a short op in a few days. We were laying in bed with the blinds open, so it wasn't completely dark. We heard our door squeak a little, then the sound of little feet against the floor. We thought one of our kids had woken up, so we turned the lamp on beside the bed, and nothing. Nobody was there. We go to the kids' rooms, and they were all asleep. We were a little freaked out, but we ignored it. My husband left a few days later for the op, and that's when shit hit the fan. Our first night alone, the kids and I were watching TV when all of a sudden the box of chips flew off the fridge. I told my kids that we probably left it too close to the edge. That night, after I tucked them in, I went to my room to watch Netflix. I got up to get something to drink, and I always check on them to make sure they're covered up. I snuck a peek into my daughter's room, and she's asleep, but her blanket was being moved off of her in an upward motion, like someone was lifting it. I flung her door open, and the blanket dropped. I thought I was going crazy. A few days passed with nothing, but then it started happening again. I was in my room at night, and I started hearing crying. Like deep, sad crying. I rushed into the hallway. Both kids were asleep. I didn't tell anyone because I'm sure I would have sounded certifiable. The next day, my kids were playing in my daughter's room. They came running out screaming, saying there was a girl in the closet. The girl screamed at my daughter to take her pigtails out or she'd cut them off. The little girl also called my daughter a little bitch. That same night, I let the kids sleep on the couch with me because they were so freaked out. I FaceTimed my cousin, and she heard crying in the background. She asked if it was my kids. I said no and showed her they were asleep. The next day we went to the store. We came back home and there was muddy footprints leading to my bathroom and onto the shut toilet seat. They were not from my kids. Later, my son tells me Scary is the name they call the ghost. They said Scary wants her Uncle Sean, and that's why she's there. I freaked out. I called my husband, and people in his unit said they had similar stuff happen in base housing. It's all haunted. So my husband sent the chaplain to our house to bless it. He walked in and said the spirit was strong, and what he just did was going to make it mad. When my husband came home, we instantly looked for a new place. On the day we moved out, we had all of our stuff scattered while we packed. We happened to look over and saw a candle was lit. Neither one of us lit that thing. I'm glad we got out. It was the creepiest situation I've ever experienced. My Aunt Maria and my Uncle Albert live in a small Midwestern city in the suburbs. They're now in their 70s, but they've lived in the same house since the late 1970s when they got married. The house has a basement that has always creeped me out. It's a normal ranch-style house, I think built in the 1950s, with a big basement because of tornadoes. When you enter, the staircase to the basement is to your left, protected by a simple metal gate. The kitchen is to the right of the entrance, and the living room borders the large staircase's metal railing. The staircase is carpeted and really steep. When my cousins were kids, they probably put in the metal gate for fear of them falling down the stairs, but they're steep, like oddly so. When I was a kid, I'd go over to their house to play video games with my cousins. They had a Nintendo in the basement. There's a den down there with an old TV and some boxes and an old armchair. The basement turns to the right from this area into a wide hallway. In this hallway, there's more junk and a bar that I don't think they've ever used. It has more boxes and random stuff around it. At the end of this hallway, there's a brick wall and some frosted windows that let the daylight faintly shine in. To the right of the bar, there's a smaller hallway where there's a washing machine and a dryer. My Aunt Maria does laundry there. I think this smaller hallway goes on to meet up with another brick wall, above which would be the driveway where you can just barely see through more frosted glass windows at ground level. So that's a physical description of the basement. I'll go over a handful of the strange things I associate with it. When I was a kid and I'd go down into that basement, I would never go farther than the den area. I just refused. It creeped me out. And I would make sure that when I turned the lights off, that I would run up the stairs to get out of there. That's pretty normal behavior for a kid. But having been there as an adult, I've noticed that everyone seems to have that kind of reaction down there. Except maybe my aunt. I don't think Albert goes down there much. Something that's important to note about my Aunt Maria is that she's an incredibly neurotic, nervous person. She keeps her house spotlessly clean, including plastic on the furniture. If something is out of place for her, she'll put it back immediately. That's just the kind of person she is. Except when it comes to the basement. My family moved out of that city when I was about 12, but we'd come back to visit my dad's family there about once a year. I remember once going back down there after having not been there for a whole year and discovering that the Nintendo cartridges and the TV remote were exactly where I had left them on the floor near the TV. It struck me as really strange that Maria hadn't put them somewhere else or neatly arranged them since I knew that I had moved them. It just seemed so out of character for her. One thing also I should note. My Uncle Albert's mother was killed during a robbery gone wrong in the 1990s. They never found her killer. Some of the boxes in the basement are likely her things. I know that's a very on-the-nose, cliched kind of thing, but I swear it's true. That said, I was creeped out by the basement as a small child well before her tragic death. I'm not sure if there's a connection, it just seems like it could be important. The last time I stayed in their house was 2 years ago. I was 29 years old and the basement still creeped me out. Honestly, I've had weird dreams about it my entire life. I have these dreams where I'm in their house and something wrong is emanating from the staircase that goes down there. I'm ignoring whatever it is, just trying to act normal, but I can feel it. So, this last time I stayed in their house, I was in my cousin Madison's room. She's an adult now, but they keep her room the same as it was when she was a teenager. I kept hearing this sound coming from the basement. This kind of low, roaring noise. Almost like trucks passing on a highway in the distance, except their house isn't anywhere near a highway. I couldn't sleep. Every time I'd start to fall asleep, I'd hear something. I ended up locking the bedroom door and sitting up all night. I felt silly about it in the morning, but I still avoided the basement for the remainder of my stay with them. 2 years have passed, and last month my Aunt Maria had some kind of nervous breakdown. She's currently hospitalized. My cousin said that his mom has been talking weirdly, not making sense. I bit my tongue and didn't ask him if she talked about the basement. I had a feeling he'd either say yes or get mad at me. We've never discussed it being haunted, but I'm sure he knows something is off. I'm 500 miles away from it, and I still dream about the basement in that house. It's like a bad place, a bad space. I think the next time I'm there, I'm going to make an attempt to explore the whole thing, during daylight, to see if I can break the spell. I'm worried about my aunt, though. Living in a haunted house can't be good for your mental health. Equally concerning is the fact that I keep dreaming about this place. It's like it's in my head. Like there's a physical space version of it and a mental space version, and something like that taking up my mental real estate is deeply worrying. I'm a skeptic, but I'm not so arrogant to believe I have all the answers. There are still things that I can't explain. The creepiest, potentially paranormal thing that has happened to me took place in the winter of 2011. I was in college and had come home for winter break to spend time with family. For some additional context, my aunt and uncle lived around 30 minutes outside of town. They had a daughter, A, who was a few years younger than me, and two significantly younger children, K and T. My aunt and uncle were out of town for the night, so the kids were all alone with their older sister. Around 1:30 a.m., my mom received a pretty frantic phone call from A. She claimed that K had woken up several times, in tears, claiming that a monster scratched her. A had chalked it up to a nightmare the first few times, but the last time she lifted up K's pajamas to find large scratch marks. The family had no pets, and T had been downstairs with A the entire time. So my mom sent my brothers and me to check on the house and my cousins. When we arrived, the three of them were sitting in the living room with the lights on. I checked K's side and found the scratches that A had described. I wouldn't say they were too big to have been caused by K, but there were definitely scratches. My brothers and I then split up and made sure all the doors and windows to the house were locked before searching every room. We found nothing out of the ordinary and decided to group everyone up in the living room for the rest of the night. The kids were finally asleep, so we didn't want to move them for a 30-minute car ride in the middle of the night. Just as we settled in, my cell phone rang. We were startled at first, but figured a family member was calling for an update. I pulled out my phone, only to wind up terrified and confused. According to the caller ID, the call had come from the house itself. The thing is, there were two landlines in the house. One was in the living room with us. The other was on the top floor of the house, an attic that had been converted into A's room. Needless to say, we left the house as fast as we could. We learned later that there was some funny stuff going on with the phone lines in the house. A few times a day, one of the units would redial a number that had been called recently. The call would disconnect if you answered. The telephone company explained it as an error with the phone itself. I consider myself a skeptic. However, my cousins and their family are the reasons I'm still open to the existence of the paranormal. I think my house unhaunted itself. We moved into our current home almost 5 years ago. There were always little things that seemed odd to me, and it got to the point where I was so sure it was haunted I looked into the history of the house, but I didn't find anything. When we moved in, all the doors and windows had chimes. If they were opened, a chime would sound. The chimes seem to happen a lot, but we have 3 dogs, and I guess I just assumed it was just my husband or one of my stepkids opening doors. At some point, a few months after we moved in, I was home alone, and it finally dawned on me that I was hearing the chimes. I couldn't figure out which door or window it was coming from. This continued when I was home alone or when my family was around, but no one was causing the chimes. Only I heard it. Eventually, I removed all the devices that caused the chimes because it was scaring me. We live in Florida, and the house is ranch style without an attic or a basement. That said, I kept hearing footsteps upstairs. It wasn't scampering of little rodent feet. If you've ever lived on the first floor of an apartment, you know what it sounds like to have someone walking across the room above you. That's exactly what it sounded like. There is absolutely no way anyone would stand up there, let alone walk. I did have my husband poke his head up there and check, but there wasn't anything, not even rodent droppings. The washer and dryer are in the garage, right next to the garage door. One day, I was cleaning the kitchen and went to throw the kitchen towel in the washer. I always keep my washer open if it's empty. So, I opened the garage door and tossed the towel in. I then decided to just do an entire load of laundry. My closet with the laundry basket is on the same wall as the washer, just on the opposite side. I grab the basket and go back to the garage, and the washer lid is closed. No way did throwing the little dish towel have enough force to knock it closed. Plus, I would have heard it slam because I was right there. Several times, I would start a load of laundry and then go to check if it was done, and the washer lid would be open. The washer would be full of sudsy water, but the lid would be open. My washer would not run or add any water with the lid open. Now, all of these things by themselves aren't too bad, but all together, especially the footsteps, yeah, all of this had me freaked. I talked to my husband about it many times, but he never heard anything. He just didn't believe me. I told him that this is exactly what happens in every scary movie. No one believes the person experiencing everything until it's too late. About 8 to 10 months after we moved in and I've been telling hubby about the sounds, something finally happens to him. It was late at night. I was sitting on the sofa watching TV. Stepkids were with their mother, and hubby was in his video game room, which was on the back of the house. My husband comes into the living room and says, "Ha ha, very funny." I had no idea what he was talking about. He said I was outside his window tapping repeatedly on it. I was not. I still don't think he believes me. One day, I was at work, and my husband and stepson were the only two home. Husband was mowing the grass, and stepson decided to do a load of his laundry. Apparently, when stepson went to check his laundry, the washer opened, and it was full of sudsy water. He went outside and asked hubby why he stopped his laundry. My husband told me this story when I got home, and swears me and stepson set this up. We didn't. I never talked to my stepson about what was happening because I didn't want to scare him. Well, everything calms down, and it seems like at least a year goes by without incident. Then my dad dies. He lived in Ohio and had never visited my new home. 3 or 4 months after he passed, I was in the kitchen cooking dinner. Husband was in the game room and stepkids were with their mother. My kitchen, living room, and dining room are all kind of open, with a wall partway separating the kitchen and living room. It's like a big circle with a small wall in the middle. I can enter the kitchen from the living room and dining room area, or the opposite side that leads to the garage into my bedroom. Anyway, I'm bent over checking the food in the oven, and I look over to the garage door, and clear as day, I see a man walk by through to the living room. I just see hairy legs and tan shorts. I immediately know this isn't my husband. I walk back through the opposite side and look into the living room. No one's there. My dogs aren't fazed. They're just chilling on the sofa. I go into the back room to check on hubby, thinking maybe it was him. He's kicked back with his legs on the computer desk watching YouTube. As soon as I see him, I burst out crying. I'm not a crier, so this scared hubby. I told him what happened and he offered to hang out with me while I cooked. I must have really freaked him out because he only leaves that room to eat, sleep, and work. After thinking about it, I feel like those were my dad's legs. He had these tan shorts he wore when I was a kid. He never wore shorts in public, but we lived in a trailer without air conditioning and it got hot a lot. That happened about 2 years ago. Knock on wood, I haven't had any incidents since. I've come to a point in life where my mom is trying to tell me all those family secrets I was too young to understand. Every weekend or so we have these long talks. It was a bit off-putting at first, but I eventually came to value the anecdotes and lessons she gave me. They had the feel of bedtime stories, really. Only the protagonists were now my family and people I knew. The implications of the events were very real. The effects ranged from anger, laughter, to nostalgia. Nostalgia. That's what I first felt when we talked about the old house. That building which has seen many changes lately in ownership and purpose. That building which is always closed and evacuated exactly after 10 p.m. That building with an old rusty plaque that dates back to 1810. That building was where I lived for most of my childhood. When I found out that many locals thought it a haunted place, I was confused. My days as a child roaming its halls and corridors, whose height was unlike any house I have ever seen, were quite normal and very fond to me. I had no memory whatsoever of anything paranormal taking place, not even the classic friend that was but a product of my imagination thing. Doubtful and sometimes mocking faces were the reaction to my uneventful experience. I just ignored the matter up until my mom brought it up at one of our talks. I asked my mom, "Did anything strange ever happen to you or my brothers?" Nothing ever happened to me. And then my mom started from the very beginning. We arrived at the old house when I was about 6. Mom had truly struck a good deal. We would get to live in the ground floor of this massive, 2-storied beautiful house and pay a small rent if we agreed to help the cleaning lady with the first floor once a month. Maybe it was too good a deal to be true, actually. The owners didn't care to mention it, but others warned Mom of the danger. Hair being pulled by an invisible hand, footsteps on the upper floor, knocks on windows whose maker never showed up, stuff out of place, stuff like that. Those were boringly common tropes about haunted old places, and people loved to talk even when they never visited the place themselves. So my mom decided to take the offer, although not without a certain degree of dread. As papers were being signed and furniture being moved, something happened. A neighbor, an old lady that had, as Mom vividly recalled, the habit of looking behind you when talking to you, said, "You'd best be mindful of the girl. She's a devilish one, no two ways about it." And then the neighbor told the tale of a little girl that was buried within one of the walls of the house. Apparently she had an accident, and, as a weird custom had it, she was made part of the building, so as to make it stronger. As far-fetched as it seemed, my mom took note, perhaps out of fear for this crone-looking figure. My mom went to the building all by herself, directly to what would be our washing room. She faced the wall inside of which this girl was supposedly lying, and she said a prayer. She whispered straight to the white, now yellow, peeled-off surface. "We mean you no harm. We just want to live here like a true family, so please don't do anything to hurt us." After that, Mom left our fanciest platter with some candy in front of the decaying wall, as well as a couple of votive candles. Our very first days at the old house have disappeared in the mists of our memory. If anything scary ever happened, it would have had to be so minor that it was eclipsed by all the great times we had. My mom always kept the girls' platter full of candy and desserts. Whenever she bought or baked something sweet, a bit of it went to the platter. Who would have imagined that I had to share with a ghostly presence? And that seemed to be the end of the otherworldly chapter. But, as we reminisced about the important things that transpired at those 6 to 7 years we spent at the house, weird anecdotes started to come back to my mom's memory. Since the old house was quite large, it became sort of a hot spot for both my mom's and my big brother's friends. We would have these big, albeit chill, parties every month or so. On one occasion, my brother threw a party in his own living room. Yes, the building actually had an entirely separate and independent small wing. It was late at night. Dudes and gals were dancing to my brother's DJ skills, but then someone came near to talk to him. It was a friend of his, and he claimed to have seen a kid using the rusty creaking swing that was beyond my brother's place. He went to take a look from the window. The structure of the contraption could be barely made out. Indeed, the seat was moving to the constant creaks, but it was empty. My brother went out to the empty lot I used as a playground during the day. It was completely enclosed by tall, abandoned buildings, so at night, the place looked as dark as some beast's throat. He called out. No answer was made, and the creaking slowly halted. My brother decided to go look for me at Mom's wing, meaning the main wing of the house. Once inside, he told Mom that the empty lot was a dangerous place for a kid to play at during the night. She was weirded out. Dear, your little brother has been sleeping in his room since your friends arrived. My brother couldn't believe it. Together they went to pay a visit to my room. I was asleep, snoring. And who was the kid my friend saw at the swing? I saw the thing moving on its own, I swear. Needless to say, the party moved to the main wing, away from that lot. So I asked my mom if she ever saw this kid. She said she didn't see anything at all. But she did start to remember the time an aunt of hers came to the old house when we were away. Now, the main entrance to the house has practically stayed as it was during my childhood. A big 2-piece black metal gate that was opened using a remote. Was how cars came to a narrow garden and then entered the garage. The gates had a metal netting at the bottom and it reached low enough for anyone to clearly see the feet of people standing on either side. It was a pretty cool feature. As a kid, I liked to try and spot whoever dared to use the doorbell. This very doorbell was no doubt relentlessly pressed by one of Mom's aunts at a certain date. Apparently she wanted to ask about a piece of gossip she heard. A pair of feet wearing kids' shoes greeted her through the netting some minutes in. Hi dear, is your mom home? The voice of a little kid gave a sharp, No! Well, would you mind letting me in? I'll wait for her. When is she coming back? The person on the other end said that he didn't know. I'm locked up. I'm all alone. My mother left me here and I can't get out. The woman felt pity for the child and decided to stay put until my mother came home. Soon my mom arrived in her old crimson Cherokee. She gave a honk when she saw her aunt and they both entered the old house. My aunt asked her how she could leave her child like that, home alone. He was very sad. My mom suddenly stopped and frowned. What are you talking about? He was with me all along. The trunk opened and there I was, playing with some toys. My grandaunt grabbed me by the hand and touched my face. She was getting more and more pale by the second. She started to babble, It's you! It's really you! You are here! We all went to the living room, but then I left to do something else. My mom told me that it took a couple of chocolates to get her aunt out of shock. These are the most prominent stories my mom told me. Many other things happened, but they were much more cliched and rather short. But, according to my mom and the friends who were involved, they did happen. And, as if that wasn't enough, you've got some facts. The old house has never again been used as a house. Only businesses have set up shop, but a lot of them have left rather quickly. Nowadays, there's a restaurant/bar. I've heard stories that point to something weird taking place. At 9 p.m., all the patrons are asked to leave, even during weekends. That's right. Keep in mind that most businesses of that kind make a lot of their profit during these crucial hours. A friend of the family had this evacuation happen to him, to which he asked why. One of the waiters told him that they all left the building after 10 because of the terrifying things that occurred after. Let's not forget that the house is at least 200 years old. A faded plaque at the front says that the building is meant to honor some local cavalry unit of the Revolutionary War. Frankly, I don't know what to think of all this. So this happened a few years ago when I was about 23 or so. A small group of my friends were all interested in the paranormal, and they often went ghost hunting. And more often than not, they came back with nothing. I, on the other hand, didn't really believe in the paranormal, or I thought there was a scientific reason behind all of it. So, one day after we were chilling at a local arcade, my friends wanted to go ghost hunting again. Normally I would have passed and went home to play some video games, but a girl who I had a huge crush on at the time, let's call her A, said she was down and that she bought a thermal camera for it. So, wanting to be around her more, we set off for the night hunt. We drove for about 15 minutes till we reached our destination. We parked in a Subway parking lot. There were about 6 to 8 of us. There was myself, A, her best friend at the time, C, and the rest I didn't know that well. After we parked, it took us about 5 minutes to reach the local church. We had to cut through their parking lot to reach a little wooden gate. From there, it took us to a neighborhood and we had to sneak around and avoid cars, since it was about 2:45 a.m., and a group of teenagers wearing mostly black wouldn't look too good. Anyways, it took us about 10 minutes to reach the woods where our ghost hunt location was at. So we got ready. And by getting ready, I mean I was checking my Facebook to see if any of my other friends were online. Then we started walking. It wasn't too deep in the woods. I could still see homes and such. We were walking on a dirt path, and all I could think about was how much I hate mosquitoes. The walk was boring, to be honest. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. Everyone else was freaking out and saying that they saw this and they saw that. Once we made it through the woods, we came across a baseball park on the other side of the neighborhood. We sat down and chatted for a bit, trying to decide what to do next. Could either go around the woods to get back to our cars, or walk back through the path again, which was the shorter way. We decided to walk back down the path. On our way back, I was near the front, and I made a decision that might have caused what happened next. Somewhere near the middle of the trail, I started to welcome the paranormal and push it to do something, anything. In my head, I was saying things like, "Go on, do something to me. Show me you're here. Use my body, anything." I suddenly started to feel numb and lightheaded. I remember starting to get tunnel vision, like I could see the edge of my vision fading into darkness. Then suddenly, I woke up on top of a guy He was holding my face in his hands, and he's whispering or saying something in a different language to me. Everyone was staring at me and asking if I was okay. I asked them what happened. They said I stopped a few times, that I wouldn't respond when they were asking me questions. They also said I would laugh, but I didn't believe them because I tend to be on the quiet side. After that, everyone was saying that we should just call it a night, but they wouldn't want me to drive. The next morning when I woke up, I had some scratches on my arm, but I chalked it up to the tree branches. A's friend C messaged me on Facebook asking if I was okay, and I told her I was. I asked what happened and she told me about it. I asked her who was there and she mentioned a few names, but the only name I could remember was Tim, or Timothy. She said there wasn't anyone there with that name. Half an hour later, she messaged me back with a website link. When I clicked on it, it opened up a missing child's page for a kid named Timothy. He was 8 years old, and he went missing a year or two before we went to the woods. Lately, I've had the urge to go back to those woods. Had I not experienced this firsthand, I would have totally not believed it. As it is, I have no explanation for it. 3 years ago, around this time actually, I was sharing a studio apartment with a friend. I was tidying up some of my things, and she was sitting on her bed. We were just talking while I cleaned. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I'm flung several feet in the air, horizontally. Absolutely out of nowhere. I landed on my elbow and I busted up pretty bad. My roommate started flipping out. She took me to the hospital and everything. Then later that night, we were sitting in our apartment talking about what happened when this black line starts being drawn on the wall right before our eyes. We had never had anything odd happen in the apartment before, then, or after. That was it. Absolutely insane. Before this, I didn't really believe all that much in the paranormal. I thought it was interesting, and if it were real, I firmly believed ghosts could not touch you. Now, I don't know what to think. So this is a true story. It actually happened to my mom. Now, it may seem unbelievable, but it really did happen. My mom had a loving relationship with her grandma. She loved to visit her as a child until her unfortunate passing. However, strange things happened to her when she used to visit her house. In one instance, they were gardening together when footprints appeared in the freshly tilled soil. Another time, the toaster was painted, so she and her grandma had to chisel it all off. Other times, the cat would stare off into seemingly nowhere and follow something, and then suddenly leave. Another time, there was vacuuming in the neighbor's house while the neighbors were gone. When they went to investigate, nothing was there. And once, there was a knife stuck into the side of the doorway. Now all of this seems really strange to me, and I half believed it. Until now. My mom's aunt moved into this house after my mom's grandma had passed. Then my aunt passed away recently, unfortunately. So my mom helped her uncle sell this stuff by holding a garage sale. During the sale, my mom suddenly saw this white rocking chair. There was a small boy, around 10 years old, rocking in the chair very hard. So my mom walked by and said something like, "Having fun in that rocking chair?" To which he looked at her very angrily and then replied, "It's haunted." My mom laughed and said, "Really? How do you know?" Little boy said, "It's haunted. I can feel it." He then walked off, and later my mom couldn't find him. It was as if he disappeared. She asked one of the other people helping if they saw the boy, and they said no. That was reasonable. There were a lot of people there. My mom then asked where the white rocking chair was from, and they replied, "What chair?" I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm 24 years old, and when I was in first grade, I saw a spirit. At the time, my family and I lived in some apartments in Forest Park, Georgia. These apartments had very nice red carpet in the living rooms. They've been abandoned for a while now, but I often drive by there just to see if I still feel the same terrifying feeling I felt when that night happened. My family consisted of me, my older brother, 2 younger sisters, my mom, and her boyfriend at the time. One night I woke up around 2:30 in the morning because I got thirsty and had to pee. Counterproductive, right? As I stepped into the hallway, I saw who I thought to be my mom's boyfriend sitting on the sofa watching TV. I approached him to ask what he was watching and got no response. So I got closer, said it again, but with a little more authority in my voice, because in my mind, it's very rude to ignore someone talking to you. When I was standing about 2 feet away, I felt off. I noticed that I still couldn't see his face or body, even though the TV was on. I could only see a shadowy silhouette. I froze because the air now felt heavy. The shadow turned towards me. It let out a terrifying scream and flew down the hall towards the hall closet by my mom's room. I stood there in shock for about 20 seconds before I started crying and screaming. I woke the entire apartment. My mom asked what happened, and I told her. The look in her face wasn't of surprise, but a look that said, "So, you've seen it too." She told me and my siblings that she felt a man standing over her bed at night, breathing on her. The boyfriend said on one of his off days, he'd be shaving, and in the mirror he could see someone, a shadow, standing in the shower behind him. The next morning we went to the renter's office, and my mom had me tell the guy what I saw. My mom got pretty hot, telling the guy, "Hey, I told you that apartment was weird." The guy then told my mom that 6 months before we moved in, the previous guy living there was killed during a home invasion. The murderer stuffed his body into that hall closet, and he wasn't found until 2 weeks later. We moved into another apartment when I was in 3rd grade. My family and I stayed on the bottom floor. My older brother and I shared a room. My bed was next to the window. I never opened the window because I was afraid of seeing people walk by at night. One night, however, I opened the window because I was hot. I thought I saw a lady in a white dress standing outside. But I just wrote it off as me seeing stuff and being paranoid and just being tired. Sometime later, I spent the night at my cousin's apartment. He happened to live in the same apartment building, but he was on the 3rd floor. It was a big sleepover with all my guy cousins, so we did what normal 8 to 11-year-olds did and played video games and other dumb stuff. Once everybody went to bed, that's when it happened. I slept by the window and I opened it because I was on the 3rd floor and there was no balcony. but I saw that same lady in a white dress. Outside. This time, she was trying to get me to come out the window. She kept motioning for me to come. If I had gone, I would have probably died or been severely injured. She kept trying, slowly becoming angry. Her voice sounded like an adult man, but 10 times deeper. I tried to close my eyes and pretend like it wasn't happening, but it didn't work. I could feel her get closer. I rolled over top my cousin to get to the other side of the bed. I had to get away from the window. The whole time I kept my eyes closed. Eventually I stopped hearing the voice and went to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I had 4 to 5 scratch marks going down the length of my leg. As a kid, I used to live in an old home in the suburbs of Perth, Western Australia. The home was built in 1939, and I believe it was war housing for vets after the Second World War. My parents bought the house in 2000. The original home was at the front of the house, which had small creaky wooden floorboards and high ceilings. It only had about 3 rooms. My room, my sister's room, and a playroom, and this part of the house was where a lot of the activity was centered. A hallway connected the old house to what was originally the backyard, but had been renovated to add a large modern wing onto the existing structure. My parents' room was in this wing. I lived there until I was about 12 years old, and my experience begins at around age 5 or 6. I started to hate sleeping in my room, and being in that part of the house in general. Every time I was there, I felt uneasy, even during broad daylight, and I had no idea why. Activity was usually focused in the toy room, the biggest room in that part of the house. Small things like toys moving, going missing, and turning on in the middle of the night when they were switched off hours prior. The first experience I had was when I was around 5. I had a vivid night terror of a dirt-covered black glove reaching out from under my pillow and attempting to grab me. When I told my parents, they seemed unbothered, although now I know this wasn't the case. This comes into play later. When I was around 7, I remember a Barbie keyboard my sister had. It turned on and played some sort of tune late at night. My sister woke me up as any kid would, and we both went and woke up our parents. When they heard what was happening, they were visibly on edge. This was not the first experience they had in that room. After some apprehension, my dad went in and turned the keyboard off. When he did that, the ceiling light wouldn't turn on. However, it worked in the morning. Another occasion involving toys happened in my room. I was around 8 years old. I had a 2008 Mummy's Gold Matchbox toy set. If anyone is unfamiliar with it, it's a battery-powered track which, once a Matchbox car runs over a button, or if the button is pushed, it activates a mummy's eyes to glow and a voice saying, "I've got you now." I was having trouble sleeping one night. I was wide awake, so I know this wasn't some hallucination. From the dead silence of night, I heard, "I've got you now." I jolted to look at the track. Its arms were moving up and down repeatedly. This was not a function the toy had. Its arms were only meant to move up and down once. After a few seconds, it stopped. I had been playing with it earlier, and I distinctly remember switching it off. I didn't sleep well that night, if I did at all. I started sleeping on the couch in the living room after this. I can recall multiple occasions in which a clock would fall off the wall, no matter where it was placed or what we used to hang it up. It fell off every time. The activity was fairly quiet for the remaining years we lived there. Basic spirit stuff like bangs, scratching noises, a cold breeze when there were no windows or doors open, dogs barking at doorways and corners when there's nothing there. We finally moved out in 2013. It was only years later when my parents told me about their experiences. They're now divorced, and they rarely agree on anything, except what happened in that house. They told me the toy room used to be my sister's room when she was a baby. Baby monitors recording sounds of a lullaby player, which had no batteries in it. Or it'd be put away in a closet, only to mysteriously reattach to the crib again. But by far the most disturbing account is that of a dark figure. Both my parents woke up in the dead of night only to see a tall, dark figure around 6 feet tall, wearing a trench coat, standing over them. The figure disappeared after a blink. My parents only saw him once. Just talking about it still makes them feel uneasy. The part that terrifies me is their account of the gloves. The figure over them wore the same gloves, the same black, dirty gloves that I had seen in my night terror as a child.